Hola. Buenos dias. So the talk for the academic side today is experience design in your customer journey. We're going to go way beyond that, hopefully in the time that's allowed. And I will be glad to continue the conversations afterwards and for the rest of the day with anyone who'd be interested in talking. But why am I here? Really, why am I here? Why are you here is actually probably a better question. I imagine your e-commerce, your digital marketing, your many things with .coms and business. Who here is actually an agency, a digital agency? A couple of agency people? Who actually has a small business? A couple of small business. Who works for a very big company? Great, so we covered everyone, so this will not be specific to anyone, but it will be valuable, I think, to all in that way. Let me talk a little bit about my journey here and how I got here today. When I was 5 years old, I had, well, actually, we don't have time for that, do we? So let's fast forward just a little bit, and actually we'll go to when I was 23. I was very fortunate to have one of my friends invite me to go work for her dad. And I learned such an amazing amount of experience. I had a chance to actually teach people how to start their own businesses. And I had never had my own business. So I used a great book called 1 Minute Manager, and I still recommend it. We've learned a lot more since then, but it was a great way to start. But I was just so excited to be in the entrepreneurial space. I grew up in a poor, lower middle class working family. I literally ate government cheese as a kid. I had no entrepreneurs in my family. So having this opportunity to teach people how to start business was just amazing for me. Unfortunately, that enthusiasm didn't last. The reality is much different than our hopes and dreams oftentimes, and we have to get through it. It actually led me to get an ulcer at 24 from the stress that I had. My stomach was so ruined. What happened to do that? Well, there's one day in particular that I remember. We had partners in from Japan, and they flew all the way from Tokyo to Philadelphia. And they had to essentially sit in a room by themselves watching a video that the owner of the company had previously sold them, instead of the owner of the company sitting with them to do the partnership. I started feeling terrible. I couldn't believe that he would let them sit that long and sit like anxiously trying to get his time, while he was busy having cereal, while he was busy just kind of cutting it up with people in the back. And that's where I really learned that the most important thing in business is empathy, about caring for our customers, about caring actually for the whole of the market. The thing is that I've almost always been wrong, or at least I've been at the wrong time, way ahead of my time too often. 1994, 95, I was doing a local content business, 2 years before City Search or many of the others. But I'm a futurist. I spot trends before they happen, and oftentimes before the language even exists to explain what it is. And what I have seen as we've gone through the past 2 decades, especially, of the digital era, is the power of C. You may remember, if you were around in the early days, this idea of content, community, and commerce. As we moved into the social media era, you may not have seen this because this was more of my talk on the power of C for this era. It was about the connections we made. It was the context in which we interacted. It was our communications with one another, and ultimately our collaborations, how we were able to work together in new and exciting ways. Well, today, in this new era, we see an era of conscious capitalism, where purpose matters as much as actually profit. And in this era, we start with the idea of cause. Why? Why do we exist? What is our work? Why it is meaningful to us, and why are we doing this job? We see today everyone talk of the millennials and the change in the nature of work. That's the same thing that's been true for those of us who are Generation X and even older. It's just more prevalent today because now we see that it's an opportunity and a possibility. What we also have is the commons. This is a community of communities. It's beyond our given employer's workspace. It's beyond the market we serve. It's beyond the communities we live in. It's the idea of the global community, the commons in which we all live. moving to the idea of co-creating with one another, not just through Kickstarter, but in numerous other ways that we haven't even seen yet. But it's also about the era of competence. Because if you don't know what you're doing, it's going to be more visible than ever. We saw the problem with the BP oil spill in America. We see problems with corporations every day that we are now seeing these ugly parts inside the company. All their failures are always on display, just as all the individuals' failures will be on display in the future as well. And ultimately, it's not so much about collaboration, it's about coordination. How do we actually organize ourselves together so that we can accomplish more with the less resources that are at our disposal? So this is why this is such a great opportunity. We've always known that this was the right thing to do, and we've been chained. We've been chained by what I think of as the bonuses, the budgets, and the bozos. I'll have to write a longer post on that because we don't have time today, but it's these three things I believe that have held us back, and it's now our chance to break free from them. And if we do, this is the greatest opportunity not only of our lifetime, but perhaps of the next 100 years as well, right at this moment, and I'll explain why. Experience with purpose is exponentially more valuable. When you design for an experience to make sure that people aren't having difficulties getting their value from you, you're going to have a better business. It's that simple. There's going to be greater word of mouth, there's going to be greater loyalty, and ultimately, a lower cost of sales that results in a higher profit. It's counter to most of the thinking of the 20th century, but I tell you this is the truth. In 1999, I first came upon the idea of customer experience design while I was the head of e-commerce for the United States Mint, essentially selling collectible coins, money, that wasn't being used as money, using digital money, which I always thought was quite a funny paradox. Apparently not so funny in Spain, but it was funny for me. In this way, though, what I realized was that there were stages of the relationship. There was this period where somebody didn't know, wasn't interested. Then maybe they became aware, then they're interested, then they're considering the purchase, then they're buying, they're starting to learn it, they're using it, and then ultimately, maybe a few become evangelists. So what I realized was that we need to change people's behavior as they move across that experience life cycle. And that means that they need different knowledge at each stage of that relationship. So this became the framework broadly for design. But when we look at the causes of today and what's changing the dynamics of the marketplace and how purchasing decisions are being changed, values, not value, is the sole cause of how we make our purchase decisions. It's changing every day. Of course, this isn't true for everything with bread and certain daily products, but with more and more, whether or not the company is ecologic or biological or cares about society or gives back to nonprofits, changes whether or not we want to buy from them. What we also see, and it was funny because in this entire era of social media, we talked about the idea of transparency, is that transparency leads to accountability. That there are consequences for lying. There are consequences for cheating our customers. And we're going to be found out. So with this transparency, we must shift. Beyond that, what we see through Kickstarter and through other mechanisms is this decentralization, democratization, and activation of the global network in ways that transcend national boundaries, that transcend the boundaries of our local communities. And what we have as a result is what I call the rising tide. It's the rising tide that will lift all people to enable us all to reach our full potential. Will enable all of our businesses to be more successful as a result. And so we've started a new movement around this to connect people around the world so that they may connect with the people, ideas, and resources that will help them succeed. This was a theme from our Brain Jams event that we held last night here in Hall 4. But there are certain requirements to be able to do this. First of all, you have to find your inner superhero. You have to find the courage to stand up to do the right thing. It's not easy. We're still in a world that's bound by budgets. We're still in a world that's bound by endless seeking of profits. So to do the right thing, we must have courage. But we have an opportunity now to transform like never before. And that's the opportunity I encourage you to persist. Somehow, what we used to do together, this idea of markets and the souk, where we got together to do business with one another, where we cared about the fabric and the quality of the food and where the food came from, gave way to marketing, what we do to people, to push messages into their heads so that maybe they buy from us. But what we're seeing today is the reversal of this trend. We're seeing actually a move from marketing, which is a ticking time bomb waiting to go off, to market engagement, to having empathy, to having real concern for our customers. So what is actually the strategy that guides us into this era? Well, we look back before we look forward. The experience curve was developed in the mid-'60s by a consulting firm called Boston Consulting Group. It looked at the Model T, one of the first cars, and what they found was that as they increased production, the cost of production dropped. And so this is why it's called the experience curve. As we gain experience by building more and more cars or more units, we'll get better at it. We'll get smarter, and we'll get a better competitive advantage. And ultimately, they applied this to Black & Decker drills, drill holes, right? And in that way, they told Black & Decker, you're selling drills now for $200. If you actually produce 500,000 more units next year, you can get the cost down to $100, and you can own the market. Black & Decker did this, and it was one of the most successful strategic initiatives that we know of in corporate history from applying this strategy. So in today's era, what do we do differently as we go from marketing to market engagement? First of all, we have to understand the value that we're getting. It's more than money. It's actually about attention that we're getting from our market and from our customers. It's about the data that they share with us. It's about the labor they give us when they help our other customers solve problems. And it's about the stories they tell, whether they're positive or negative, that ultimately increases the value exponentially. So 15, 16 years ago, I started talking about customer experience. Well, it turns out that the time for customer experience design is now. So once again, I was wrong. I was too early. This is the longest that I've had to wait for anything to come to real. So we just recently put on a show, CXD Now, where I've been interviewing some of the leaders of this movement. So if you're interested in learning even more about the topic, you can go there and watch some of the videos. Of course, in English, but hopefully you can find some value in it. In this era of experience and purpose, we need new mindsets, new methods, and new measures in order to be successful with this. And in this way, it's time not just to say that we're customer-centric, but it's time for radical customer centricity, to really have deep empathy in all we do in our business, to focus on serving that customer and creating value with them. We also need to move into experience design and journey mapping, and I'll be sharing some tools for that in just a moment. And ultimately, this idea of real relationships. And in fact, I believe it's those real relationships that are the new measure, just as experience was in the past. These real relationships are reciprocal. We both get something from it. They're based on empathy. We care about each other. They're authentic because we are authentic. We're not wearing a mask. We are who we are. They are who they are. And as a result of that, they're loyal. So to help you a little bit with some tools to understand how to take advantage of this, the frameworks and tools behind this I'll share with you. But first, the definition. Engagement is interaction with intention that goes beyond concern for the transaction. As it turns out, 2 days ago, from traveling, I had a neck problem, so I sought out a massage parlor. And I found a massage place here, and I got a massage, and it was great. It was a beautiful space, and I would have written up a review on TripAdvisor to tell other people about it. When I went to pay, I said, no, I want to pay in dollars because my bank treats me better that way. She's like, no, it's better for me if you pay in euros. So that's what she did. Without asking, after I had asked, she still did it. Her $2 transaction fee, €2 transaction fee that she saved, lost her a review that would have led to hundreds of other clients. Need I say more? So I'll have to tell you about this later because I don't have enough time to go through all this, but this is where I first originated with this idea. The understanding that the market is essentially based on a trust filter between your company and the customers that it tries to serve. And the more trust that you have, the greater the flow of capital, labor, attention, story, data, etc. But where we start in this whole process to get more practical is to start with understanding that customer. This is a sample empathy map. You can download it online by just searching for empathy map. And in fact, I use another tool now called Mural.ly, that enables this to be done online in a collaborative whiteboard space where we're able to actually work with people around the world to develop an understanding of who is Nicole and how are we going to be able to serve them. What do they need? Where do they go? What do they think? What do they feel? And what can we do to better help them accomplish those objectives? When I was working with the US Mint, what I realized very early was this idea that across the different personas, there were different topics and things that they were interested in. So how could we actually deploy digital ambassadors into the intersections of these personas across these multiple topics? And ultimately, of course, green being good, yellow being and red being bad, we want to be able to actually chart and measure where should we be investing, with which type of person, on which types of topics can we actually reach them on, and how can we actually demonstrate our expertise or express the quality of our services. Further, when I was working at Deloitte in 2012, 2013, we did the digital transformation project for the American Heart Association and trying to help this nonprofit understand how to better serve their customers' journey, which is where I actually started looking not how do we go off the site to social media with the engagement matrix, but how do we try to think about personalizing the web experience for these individuals. And what we have to come to realize is what is that core purpose and who are those people we're trying to serve. And from there, we can look across these different dimensions of topics, communities, geographies, and the sorts of actions and behaviors we're hoping they take. A simpler view on this from Oracle as we start looking at the broader journey is to just understand the different phases that we go through. There are many different ways of looking at this, and you can look at it differently for your specific business. A new tool from IBM that they've just recently released, it's free, IBM Journey Designer. Disclosure, they were a sponsor of our show, CXD Now, but it's the first one that I found where we can actually chart off what are all the different customer touch points, the email campaign, the in-person event, the website landing page, and to actually build a massive map of all of this collaboratively with our agencies, with our product people, with everyone in the company, so they could see how many times we were actually sending an email. So what do we need to do to be successful? Well, I believe we have to embrace design thinking. I believe we have to actually move away from the concept of innovation to iteration. Now, how is this different? Well, it's the same thing, except innovation now has become so meaningless to so many people. Iteration is what we need to do, constantly improving beyond that stuff. And we do that through stakeholder feedback loops, and we do that through a concept I call cooperative conflict. We have to have different ideas. We have to have diversity of perspectives in order to produce the best result. But we can do so in such a way that we're agreeable with one another, that we're not mean and that we're not unreasonable. And if we do this, we're able to decrease our cost of sales, increase loyalty, and ultimately make a more profitable business overall. It's a really exciting time, but it needs all of our help and it needs all of this work to make it happen. Because the ultimate benefit is that the switching cost of a real relationship is extremely high. It's hard for people to break up with you if you are a relationship with them. If you have a customer who comes into your business every day and you've developed a first-name basis, or like with coffee shops where they know what the order is when the person comes in, this is something that's very hard to stop in the morning. You feel like you're leaving a friend. So if you can build real relationships, the benefits aren't only in terms of profit and a stronger business, but it's also in terms of that loyalty that we so often seek. So we need to actually look after the whole of all of our stakeholders. And if we can do this with empathy, this is how we can win the future. Thank you very much. I'm sure we're way over now, so I didn't look at the time, but do we have time for Q&A?
Yes,
Okay.
we do. Tenemos ahora un turno de unos 10 minutillos para hacerle todas las preguntas que queramos a Chris. Solo tenéis que levantar la mano o haceros ver de algún modo. Let's start from one question then, to warm up a little bit the ambience. Yeah, right. So how about the profitability of all this?
Well, the thing is, it's so counterintuitive to people. You know, the woman at the massage place, she was looking after her profitability. But this was very short-sighted. Because if you look at the longer term, you can see the ripple effects of every interaction. And that one interaction, and I haven't named the company now here just out of respect, although I probably should, that could possibly be detrimental to our whole business by being worried about the €2. Where if you look at this as a longer term, the whole business itself becomes better. This is how I used to think of it as holistic business strategy. It's not just about the profit, it's about the people, it's about the planet, it's about our purpose, it's about our employees, it's our investors, and ultimately by looking after everyone is the best way to serve all of the stakeholders, not just the shareholders.
Thank you.
Mariano, thank you very much for your talk. Well, I'm doing this in English because I haven't done this for a long time, but I'm going to do this in English. It's better for you. You said we shouldn't talk about innovation rather than iteration. Yeah. So, do you think there is too much focus on innovation itself, as innovation can be? It's not a goal, but just a word that we use for everything and at every time.
Yeah, and that's essentially it. Look, I've worked with large corporate innovation groups around the world, and there are very few of them that understand what it really means. The senior leadership is investing in innovation. They're creating innovation centers, and they're trying to find the creative people to come up with new ideas. But they then put budgets on them and run them through competitions and create all this process that inhibits the creativity, that inhibits the potential. This is also the budgets, bonuses, and bozos sorts of problems, because there's a budget for how much you can do. They want innovation, but they don't want you to fail. This is not possible. In order to actually create something new and innovative, you must fail 1,000 times. I talked to the founder of the former CEO of SRI, the Stanford Research Institute. They created many technologies that are probably in your hands today about this. And this is where he really struck me on this point, that the most innovative companies were ones that constantly iterated, that didn't get stuck on one particular idea, but always remained focused on the goal. What is the value we're trying to create, not how we create it. And then in that way, constantly iterating in new ways to accomplish that goal. So this is why I think we should shift the language more to iteration. But you know, innovation is a real term. It's just not used very well by so many people in corporate organizations.
Some kind of hype.
Yes, it's very hyped, exactly. Anything else? I'm happy to talk more later. I'll be around.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Gracias. Sit in a room by themselves watching a video that the owner of the company had previously sold them, instead of the owner of the company sitting with them to do the partnership. I started feeling terrible. I couldn't believe that he would let them sit that long and sit like anxiously trying to get his time while he was busy having cereal, while he was busy just kind of cutting it up with people in the back. And that's where I really learned that the most important thing in business is empathy, about caring for our customers, about caring actually for the whole of the market. The thing is that I've almost always been wrong, or at least I've been at the wrong time, way ahead of my time too often. 1994, 95, I was doing a local content business, 2 years before City Search or many of the others. But I'm a futurist. I spot trends before they happen, and oftentimes before the language even exists to explain what it is. And what I have seen as we've gone through the past 2 decades especially of the digital era is the power of C. You may remember, if you were around in the early days, this idea of content, community, and commerce. As we moved into the social media era, you may not have seen this because this was more of my talk on the power of C for this era. It was about the connections we made. It was the context in which we interacted. It was our communications with one another, and ultimately our collaborations, how we were able to work together in new and exciting ways. Well, today, in this new era, we see an era of conscious capitalism, where purpose matters as much as actually profit. A lot more since then, but it was a great way to start. But I was just so excited to be in the entrepreneurial space. I grew up in a poor, lower middle class working family. I literally ate government cheese as a kid. I had no entrepreneurs in my family. So having this opportunity to teach people how to start business was just amazing for me. Unfortunately, that enthusiasm didn't last. The reality is much different than our hopes and dreams oftentimes, and we have to get through it. It actually led me to get an ulcer at 24 from the stress that I had. My stomach was so ruined. What happened to do that? Well, there's one day in particular that I remember. We had partners in from Japan, and they flew all the way from Tokyo to Philadelphia, and they had to essentially, hola. Buenos dias. So the talk for the academic side today is experience design in your customer journey. We're going to go way beyond that, hopefully in the time that's allowed. And I will be glad to continue the conversations afterwards and for the rest of the day with anyone who'd be interested in talking. But why am I here? Really, why am I here? Why are you here is actually probably a better question. I imagine your e-commerce, your digital marketing, your many things with .coms and business. Who here is actually an agency, a digital agency? A couple of agency people? Who actually has a small business? A couple of small business. Who works for a very big company? Great, so we covered everyone, so this will not be specific to anyone. But it will be valuable, I think, to all in that way. Let me talk a little bit about my journey here and how I got here today. When I was 5 years old, I had, well, actually, we don't have time for that, do we? So let's fast forward just a little bit, and actually we'll go to when I was 23. I was very fortunate to have one of my friends invite me to go work for her dad. And I learned such an amazing amount of experience. I had a chance to actually teach people how to start their own businesses. And I had never had my own business. So I used a great book called 1 Minute Manager, and I still recommend it. We've learned